Hey, friends, welcome to the Voices Listed podcast with Dr. PMak. Today I am speaking with Alison Isaac. Alison Isaac is a Caribbean-Canadian writer and teacher from Toronto in Canada. Besides Canada, Alison has lived in Mexico, in Ecuador, as well as in Colombia. Her story, Legacy, was long listed for the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival's Emergent Writers short story competition and named winner of the Rewrite Reads inaugural issue. A short story, Isa, was also published by Rewrite Reads, and their first children's book, Kukumba, was published in December 2020, while her narrative Speech Patterns was also published in Living Hyphen in 2022. Alison has worked on numerous projects that include running the Global Narrative handle on Instagram that celebrates writers of the African diaspora with a particular interest in diverse Canadian literature through content and gifts that center their stories. Some of the books she has helped bring to the world include And the Walls Came Down by Denise da Costa, Sweet as Sugar by Camille Ramdois, Black Cake, Turtle Soup, and Other Dilemmas by Gloria Blizzard. Along with many other books that she has been a part of. Alison is an amazing individual that continues to center the work of authors in Canada and beyond, and I'm excited to have her as part of this conversation today. Join us as we speak about her work and what motivates her to work with Black authors as well as other diverse writers as well. Thank you for joining Voices Listed with Dr. PMak. So Alison.
Yes, sir.
It's such a pleasure to have you on this conversation. You are someone that I have admired for a long time in terms of the work that you've been doing and, writing and publishing. But importantly, the way you have been working to center others, right? To center other authors, right? I watch you, I follow you on Instagram through the Global Narrative handle and see sort of centering the writing of different folks. Tell me a bit about that. What led you to say, hey, I don't want to spotlight the work that I do alone. I want to spotlight the work of others. What was that about?
Yeah, so I would say that global narrative, so it actually started years ago, but it's had a few iterations. But I would say in the most recent one, the one where we're, celebrating writers of the African diaspora through content and conversations and all that sort of thing, that came up just, I guess, out of a desire to share the joy of reading and also to shine a light on the writers who have brought so much enjoyment, so much like fulfillment to my life. It's just fun, I noticed that I would get into conversations with folks at, bookstores or different events or online even. And they end up being some of the most like fulfilling conversations that I have with folks. And I'm an introvert myself, right? So, I'll say hello to folks and be polite. I'll do small talk if I have to, but I don't love it. But get me talking about books. If we get into a book conversation, then I feel like that's when you really get to see my personality, and that's where I get to learn about the person that I'm talking to. So that's essentially what it is. Like global narrative is just kind of an excuse to like build community around this thing that I love online. And I really feel like writers have given me so much. Books and reading have given me so much, and so it's just the opportunity to explore that further.
Wow, that's interesting. And so let's go back even to the foundations of it. I know that at one point you're an educator and you lived in 3 or 4 countries before. And so is this love of literature, love of reading coming from you being an educator? What does growing up like? What is your background? What was growing up? What did it look like for you? What were the influences that led you to go on this path of of literature and writing?
So it's funny. The story that I like to tell is I can remember being, I'm not sure how old, but I was in elementary school, And it was back when I was young enough to still share a room with my brother. And I was in my room, and my mom was trying to get me to read some random piece of art that she had on the wall, some random poster. And I was there, like, sounding it out and trying to get it. It took me a little bit of time. And then years later, she would reveal to me that she was a bit worried about my reading. She thought that I was, I guess, a bit delayed in reading, because she says that my brother, who's older than me, but not by much, he learned to read very quickly at a young age. But that wasn't the case for me. And I don't remember really ever struggling with reading, except for that moment in the bedroom. I remember like not really being sure about like the sounds, But then my memories of reading are going to the library and picking out like 7 books, reading them in a week, going back. And I'm talking about like chapter books, young, like adult, fiction, YA books. And I was in elementary school. And I also remember my 4th grade teacher telling my mom that he was worried about some of the material I was reading, because I was reading books that were written for high schoolers, right? And I was in 4th grade. But to my mom's credit, she never said, you shouldn't read this, you should read this other thing. She didn't even say, put the books away at the table. Like we'd be there eating dinner, and she just let me have my books. And so I had the opportunity to really explore the type of books that I liked. And I was lucky enough that I found some of those books early on. So I never doubted that reading could be fun, because I found books that I enjoyed. And that's what I wanted for my students when I was teaching. I felt very strongly that, when kids said that they didn't like reading, it was because they either hadn't found the book or the type of books that they liked, or it was difficult for them. And that second part was something that you could work on. And so, getting kids to kind of like discover their books and learn that it could be fun was something that that meant a lot to me. And so for me, the influence was just having the freedom to explore when I was young. And then as I got older, I would say in high school, I remember looking for books by Black authors and not really finding them in the school library, and ending up at my dad's bookshelf. My parents were divorced. Going to my dad's bookshelf and finding like James Baldwin, and so I didn't really understand James Baldwin at that time, but I read him. And through him, I found other writers like C.L.R. James. And you end up, as an adult, looking back and being like, oh, like how lucky was I to have a parent who had these like classic books, Frantz Fanon, like all of these books were on his bookshelf. But behind me now, I have some, he's passed away, but I have some of those very special books here. And it was just kind of like, the freedom to read, and the encouragement to find what I liked.
That's so interesting, and sort of starting from an early age, and you reading as you're lying there in this shared bedroom. One of the things that I also even identify with was, for my own journey, being able to read at an early age and being fascinated. So you talk about the young, adult, kind of books. I was fascinated by material that was way above my punching weight. Like,
tell us about
crazy. I mean, at 5, I would find myself 6 reading the Reader's Digest, like crying to get the Reader's Digest. And reading about all of these things and perspectives. And in my country, in Zimbabwe, at the time, we had this small little book called The Student's Companion, that had sort of, spellings and nouns and adjectives and verbs and, like teaching, and I would read it voraciously, wanting to, understand, how do you write? How do you, how do you pronounce things? How do you, and then my love, for the Reader's Digest led to me sort of looking out in the library then, and also my chosen family had a whole collection of books as well, and so immersing myself into the Hardy Boys series.
The Hardy Boys. So there was like another sort of it was like a sister series, and I don't remember what it was, but
Nancy
Drew. Was it Nancy?
No.
There was Nancy Drew, there was Hardy Boys, but there was another series, and maybe it was Nancy Drew, and I got into that series when I was in elementary school. That's why I got hype up. See, you start talking about books, and I'm like, oh yeah.
There you go. So I mean, getting into the Hardy Boys, I'll tell you, there was
Yeah.
Frank, there was Joe, there was Chet, like they were
Yes.
friends. And I would look for the series and look for the different books, right?
Yeah.
And as I grew older, right, I just always was looking for materials that would just really just put me in a different world, really understand. Even I write in my memoir that even as I sat at a market stall selling vegetables, and I would
Mm.
find myself with a book, or I'd find myself reading a newspaper. I would find myself with my Reader's Digest, right, trying to consume these things. And so tell me, Alison, and tell us, with our listeners too, so if you've lived in Mexico, in Ecuador, in Colombia, what does literature there look like, and how did those experiences for you in those different countries sort of change, if anything, or inform how you approach reading, how you approach looking for books?
So funny. So Colombia was my most recent experience, and Mexico was the first.
Hmm.
Ecuador was kind of sandwiched in there. Um,
Okay.
but I wasn't there for as long as I was in Colombia. Colombia, I spent 6 years. Mexico was a year. Ecuador was just
Mm.
under a year. So one of the fascinating things about Mexico, or one of my fascinating, I guess, experiences or memories that I have of Mexico
Hmm.
is I remember being told that there was this character, and
Hmm.
his name was Memin Peguin, if I'm remembering
Okay.
correctly. Anyway, this character is a little character in blackface. And
Mm.
it is the most fascinating thing because this was, you know, it was what, around maybe 2009, I would say.
Yeah.
And so I was living in Mexico City. Mexico City did not have many Black people at that time.
Hmm.
And going and then finally stumbling upon this book. It's like a little comic book, and seeing this little
Yeah.
character that looks like it was out of 1950s USA. Like it was just the wildest thing to see this little so-called Black boy.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember talking to people about it, and they're like, "Oh, but like he's cute." But it's like he's cute, but he's also dumb. And
Mm.
I don't think I still have it, but I wish that I had kept it because it's really like a
Mm.
very interesting artifact. And I'm as
Sure.
you asked me that question, like I'm wondering if it still exists in Mexico. Um,
Mm.
but I would say it was in Colombia that I did more exploring.
Yeah.
I started asking people about the sort of presence of Black Colombian writers.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows, like, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? 100
Hmm.
Years of Solitude. There's the
Yeah.
Netflix special that's on
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's great. That book is a
Hmm.
masterpiece. But then, like,
Hmm.
where are the Black writers? Because Colombia
Yeah.
has a very large, significant Black population.
Hmm.
And so there were a
Hmm.
few names that came up.
Hmm.
I'll have to Google them quickly while I'm here. Like
Sure.
there's Arnoldo Palacios is one.
Hmm.
There's a few children's book writers.
Hmm.
Um, and in Cali, where I was living, they
Yeah.
had a couple of book festivals, which was really interesting as well. But I can't say that they often brought like Black people to speak.
Okay.
But one of the things that came up in conversation with folks about Black writers in Colombia was that
Hmm.
Latin America, Spanish speaking Latin America, so we're excluding Haiti, for example,
Yeah.
they didn't have the same sort of, can I call it Black Power movement that they did
Hmm.
in other
Hmm.
places, like um, the French Caribbean, like Brazil. For some reason, in Spanish, it doesn't exist in the same way, but there are
Okay.
writers, and
Okay.
um, now there are a number of either festivals or
Yeah.
organizations. There's one in a place called Choco, which
Okay.
is a very Afro-Colombian department or province
Hmm.
or state in Colombia. And there is
Yeah.
a festival that happens there. There's a woman by the name of Velia Vidal who
Hmm.
runs it, and she was actually in Canada
Oh
last year
wow.
for, or she was meant to come to Canada last year for a festival in Montreal.
Okay.
And so it's just like there's a lot of little things happening now, but I
Hmm.
would say there perhaps isn't a tradition the way that there's been in other places, but it's lovely
Yeah.
to see like younger folks starting
Sure.
to kind of push this movement of like literature and reading and
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You. you speak about sort of all of these collective experiences that you had. Did those, sort of the absence of, air quotes, Black literature inform your desire to found or start a global narrative?
Yes, and I'd say the other thing that informed that was I kind of felt like my interests were particular in the sense that I don't care what language someone writes in
Mm,
originally if I can read it.
mm,
So whether that be,
okay.
I speak Spanish good enough to understand, or I'm reading them in translation. I'm
Hmm.
curious. I'm curious about the
Okay.
experiences of Black folks internationally, right? Like, what's it
Hmm.
like for
Hmm.
a Black Swedish woman? Like, what was it
Yeah.
like for her growing up? What's it like
Yeah.
for, someone from Zimbabwe
Zimbabwe.
writing? Or, yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I'm just very curious. And my
Mm,
family's from the Caribbean, right? And in the
yeah.
Caribbean, there's
Hmm.
there's English, Spanish, Dutch, French,
Yeah.
Creoles.
Yeah.
So
Mm,
it's really just being curious about the experience of folks internationally
yeah.
and thinking, maybe there's other people like me. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
always about the Black American experience.
Yeah.
Maybe it's about, folks in Finland
Yeah.
writing about
Yeah.
Blackness there,
True. True. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's really sort of aiming to spotlight these different or these unique, perspectives, right? So
Yeah.
the common denominator perhaps might be a skin tone, but
Mhm.
the perspectives or the richness of the stories that come out from these different folks then informs, broadly what scholarship or what literature looks like.
Yeah.
And so just to make a plug for my listeners here, Alison runs the Global Narrative Instagram page, which celebrates writers of the African diaspora with interest in diverse Canadian sort of literature, and then through contexts and gifts, that center their stories. And so, is there anything in particular when it comes to centering stories, Alison, that you look for, or you're just looking for these different unique perspectives? What's your takeaway as you go through these different books? What's your takeaway? Are you looking for something in particular?
You know what? I'm not looking for something in particular, and I think that is the point. I remember speaking to a writer many years ago.
Hmm.
He actually won a pretty big literary prize in the States.
Hmm.
And what he said to me was, I shouldn't be the only one. There should
Yeah.
be so many of us. We should be telling all sorts of different stories
Oh,
in the
I love
same
that.
way that, for example, what we call mainstream or white
Yeah.
authors are able to write about anything from horror to
Yeah.
thrillers to romance to
Yeah.
literary fiction. Like, we should have
Yeah.
all of these things, right? It shouldn't just
Yeah.
be like, oh,
Yeah.
every Black person needs to write about the experience of being Black in a very explicit way. Like, maybe
Mm.
they're just writing about the story of a young woman who falls in
Yeah.
love, and
Yeah.
she happens to be Black, but
I
like,
love
this is
that.
a romance. We're
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
centering this woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really what it is for me. It's like, let us write whatever we want. Let us write
Yeah.
um, things that are really hard to read,
Yeah.
and let us write things that are just like purely like fun and
Yeah.
entertaining. Like
Yeah.
let's just have all of it, kind of thing.
Yeah. I love that perspective, and so I've so many things bubbling in my head. But first, I want to hear from you. What's your approach to writing, right? So it's easy to say, hey, we should be able to write anything and everything, right?
Yeah.
And then someone is sitting there and is like, yeah, nah, we'll leave that to the Allisons of this world to do the writing. Do you have any particular style or unique approach to writing? And secondly, how would you encourage someone who's listening right now who's like, yeah, I'm hearing you, but I've got imposter syndrome. I don't think I can write. How would you address that? And so, one, what's your approach to writing? And two, what would you say to someone who's listening right now and saying, "Oh, I hear you, but here's my limitation."
I would say my approach to writing has changed over the years.
Hmm.
And I like where I am now. I would say when I first started writing, and I used to write for like local magazines and stuff, as well as kind
Hmm.
of my own
Yeah.
personal like short stories, because I
Hmm.
like to write creatively. Um,
Yeah.
I was a lot more precious about the writing. And it was like, oh, I can't let people see it because what if they don't like it? And what if it isn't written
Yeah.
well? And
Mm-hmm.
now my approach, because I'm actually working on a collection of short stories.
Uh-huh.
Now my approach is just get it out, and you can solve issues and problems that you have in the writing, like in the structure, in the whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
through editing,
Yep.
right? Because the writing is really, it's really never done. Like hearing professional writers, hearing authors say, oh, sometimes I'll go into a store and I'll like take a look at my book and I'll like want to edit something. I see something, I want to change it. That's like, that really is everyone's
Yeah.
experience, because
Yeah.
the person they were when they wrote the book is not
Yeah.
the person they are now, how many years
No.
later reading it. And that's
True.
okay. It's perfectly
Yep.
fine. And what I would say
I
to
love it.
someone who's trying to write and they're like, oh, but I'm an imposter and I don't know, it's like, it everybody feels that way. It's okay. And the sooner you can get over being precious,
Yeah.
the better it will be for the work. Because if
Wow.
you just let's say you write your first draft and it is awful.
Mm.
You get a good editor, you get a good first reader, and they're giving you feedback. That means you get to improve on the work. And the sooner
Yeah.
you do that, the better the work becomes sooner.
Yeah.
And the closer you get to having a piece of work that you're proud of, that you want to share with folks. And
Mm-hmm.
also, it's just one piece of writing. You know what I mean? It's not who you are as a person. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're awful or even a bad writer. It's
Mm.
just one piece of
Mm.
writing. And I just finished reading this book on creativity by Rick Rubin, and in it, he's like, "Hey, the more stuff you put out,
Yeah.
the less you feel so attached to any one particular piece, right?"
Wow. Wow.
So that's my approach now. It's just like, okay,
Wow.
Allison, move quickly and get feedback when you're ready to get feedback, but
Mm.
don't belabor the point. Like don't be delaying
Yeah.
that part too long, to the
Yeah.
point where it's like 15 years later.
Wow. Man, this is so I'm a sticky person, so I've just been writing notes of what you've been saying. What wonderful nuggets, right? And I just wrote here like writing is a journey, um, and get over being precious.
Yeah.
Yo,
Yeah.
yo,
Right.
hey, that's a hard one,
Right.
eh? That hit me. When you said that, it hit me. I was like, oh my word,
It's
right?
okay. It's all of us. All of us have
Wow.
felt that at some point. I think.
Yeah.
I think all artists are somewhat sensitive.
Yeah,
But you learn
yeah.
to get over it and grow. Yeah.
I'm sensitive. I'm like, when you say that, I'm like, oh, okay. And then that's a jolt. And then I wrote just below this, getting over being precious, a statement that a couple of years ago, one of my mentors, after reading, and we had been working through a process, right, for my writing, and I was producing something. And when I was done, I was like, yeah. And I had their comments, and because they've been working alongside me, right? And all comments embedded, everything is good, is edited. I submitted it. They went through it, and they're like, well, congratulations, you've made it. But this is not your best work.
Hey.
And I'm like, what? We've just spent over a year and a half. Every single day, I've been having to carve out 3 hours, 4 hours to work on this. I get over what I was calling the finish line. You then tell
Mm.
me, congratulations, but this is not the best work, or is not your best work. And
Oh, yeah.
now, several years down the line, I recognize what this mentor was saying to me,
Yeah.
that writing is a journey,
Yes.
right? And it really, when you say that, I was a trick who walked into a bookshop or walked into a bookstore, and wants to have this, I'll grab my book and I want to edit it. It's because this is the journey. They're now at a different place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, true to form, when I look 6 years back to that thing that I produced, I'm like, dude, like, really, how
What
could
were
you
you
even put
thinking?
this out into the world? What were you thinking?
Right. Right. Right.
Right. And so thank you for bringing that encouragement, and thank you for bringing that into this conversation, right? That get over being precious, be at the spot that you need to be. Remember, today I'm in this zone, but tomorrow I'm
Yeah.
not going to be, right? I'm going to be a different person with different collection of experiences, and things to share. But here's a provocation. Perhaps maybe let me not call it that, but here's a little bit of a pushback.
Okay.
So when I look at my books, or at least the things that I've had the honor and the privilege really to put together and put out into the world, I don't love one more than the other. And it takes me back to a conversation I had with my mom many years ago. It came as and I hope she'll listen to this. But anyway, here we go. We had a fight, with one of my siblings, with my older brother Daniel, and we had a fight. And when mom came back and she had the whole story, she sided with him. And she's like, oh, no, your older brother is right. And she meted an additional form of punishment. And then from that day, I carried this thing in my heart that she loves him more than me, and she loves him more than any of the other siblings. Right? And so I carried that for a number of years until one day, I got myself into a spot of trouble. I'm like, yeah, I know he's not going to get in trouble because you love him more than any of us.
Oh.
And then she held me by the scruff. And she sat me down and she said, listen, you all are my babies. I don't love one more than the other.
Yeah.
And then she let me go and I ran away. And that moment stuck with me. And I say that now in this context to say, well, even though 6 years ago, I had this, publication that I put out there, I still love it in the same way that I love the latest book that I've released this month, right?
Yes.
And so my pushback really is like, yeah, of course, get over being precious, fantastic, but like a parent, right?
Yes.
I hold on to these pieces, these literally works of literature that I have. And, a challenge for me is, which book do you market more than the other? And then I'm like, no, they should all get equal space because they are my babies.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that's so beautiful. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that story and in that perspective because, your first book, you might look back on it and say, oh, if I were to do it again, I would do it differently.
Yeah.
But the way that it is, how it exists, is a reflection of who you were at that time, what you knew, what you were able to do, and then the next one is a different reflection, or it's the same reflection of a different person at a different time, right?
Yeah.
And that is perfectly fine. Like when you look back at a picture of yourself when you were 4, you don't look the same.
True.
You wouldn't.
True.
But it was a time and a place. It's an artifact, and you can look back with nostalgia, with beauty, with gentleness, and say, "Hey, that was me at 4, or that was me at 18 with my crazy, whatever you were wearing, or and that is, I think, the beauty of having things out in the world, and I think it's part of the reason why I am a bit sentimental about actual physical books. Because, like I was saying, my dad's books are behind me. Some of them I can go pick them up.
Yes.
It's like yellowing pages, falling apart. I've taped up covers again and again, but they were his. And I can look at some of them and see his writing. And I think what a gift. So what a gift that you have that first book as whatever imperfect or whatever we want to say it is, however you feel about it. It was your first book. It started this journey of other books and your sort of, I guess, journey of being an author in the world and sharing your story and sharing your ideas, which is a very brave thing to do. So love it. Yes, love it.
It's, again, really, really brave thing to do. I'll tell you about, for example, my memoir, right? Inheritance. Once I felt I was done, and I've gone through all edits, covers, design, everything is all ready. I just needed to click and say, okay, give the publisher the permission to publish and put this thing out. It took me over 3 weeks to get to a stage. Yeah, to get to a stage where I'm like, okay, let's let it go, right? Because it took quite. It was a book that I'd written over 3-4 years. It was emotional. It was me, and it it took quite a bit. I say all of that to reflect on even the time that I met you for the first time in a different context, in a work context, with a certain organization. And, immediately we were, I think it was just, before a team meeting, and oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? And you said, hey, I've got a children's book. I've put out Cucumber. I'm like, I love children's books. And so, as we jumped into that formal meeting, I was on Amazon. I was looking for your book, and I was ordering that.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
I was ordering that book. So you've written Cucumber, you've written a children's book, and right now you're working on a collection of stories. So tell us, what's the upcoming book? What does it look like?
So it is a collection of short stories. Right now, there are about 16 short stories, and part of the reason why I say, folks, don't wait too long is because it has taken me years to get to this point. And finally,
I know about that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Then finally last year, I said, 2023, I said, Alison, by December 31st, you need to have this first draft written in whatever state. And that kind of goes along with the whole, stop being precious, because some of the writing is pretty bad, right? But it's just, it's getting the ideas down. So that you can then go back and refine them and get a step closer to sharing your stories out in the world. So that's the collection. But and thinking about as you talk about your memoir, I think that is particularly brave, writing a memoir, because at least I can kind of hide behind it's fiction, guys. But memoir is like your life. And people are, immediately, of course, associating you with the story because that's what it is. And then also the lives of other people around you. So I can totally get having to sit for a few weeks before hitting that button and saying it's done. And I know that you're interviewing me, but I'm curious to know, like, how did you sort of balance telling your truth and thinking of the audience, like, oh, people are going to read this one day, and what will they say, what will they think, and all of that?
Such a good question. How did I balance? Well, here's the thing that I did. I took a step back and introspected on my life, and I said, what has happened in my life has led me to this person that I've become, and continue to be, continue on this journey of becoming. And what of it has been negative? What if it has been positive? And of either negative or positive, what is it that I want to put out there, and why? And so, as I thought about it, I was like, well, this is my life. This is just a sum total of who I am. And so, having answered that question, say, you know what, I'm gonna, this is my life. I'm gonna put out who I am. I had to sit with the second thing. The second thing was the audience, the readers. What are they gonna think about you and your journey? And that was tough to swallow and to think about. But then I was like, this is not a dress rehearsal. This life I'm living is not a dress rehearsal. People will have opinions if you do something. People will have opinions if you don't do something. So I'm going to put out my book. And either way, they can have opinions about it, or they won't have opinions about it. It is what it is. This is my life told through my own journey.
Yes.
But importantly, you spoke earlier on about, I was also writing about other people. I was also writing about my family, my siblings, right? I was also writing about different encounters in there. Again, I had to think through, how does this represent them accurately? And how will they feel when they read this, right? And what are the potential points of pushback, right? And then I said to myself, well, if I decide to leave some elements out, I'm not doing any justice to the story of my life. If there is going to be any pushback, that is a welcome opportunity for any of my family members or any of the folks that have been portrayed in my book to actually write their story and say, hey, I see what you wrote. Here's my narrative.
Yeah.
Guess what that does? That speaks to your point about having all kinds of literature, all kinds of
Right?
stories out there,
Yes.
right? And so I had to settle with those three things, right? To say, okay, first, introspection, what I'm saying, is it fake? Number two, the audience, how are they going to receive that, right? Judge, and we live in a world like that, right, where people judge, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, I have to be comfortable enough to say, well, this is my life experience, and I'm just, I'm not living a dress rehearsal. I'm living life as it is. And then third, had to settle with this notion of, if there's any pushback against what I've written in the book, be able to ask people, whoever is pushing back, to say, hey, this is my story. I welcome you to write your story. Which, to conclude this response to you, is the open invitation that I provided in my memoir. I say that each and every one of us have a story to tell. And that we should not wait for any particular day or any particular reason. Say, well, I'll write my memoir when I've retired. Who knows?
Who knows?
Right.
Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
Right. So that was the stance that I took. But I joke around by saying that, whenever people tell me that they've bought my book or they're reading my memoir, I always say to them that I hope you keep my number after reading it, right? Because guess what? That I joke, yes, but also it's a way of dealing with my mental health. To answer that part of, this is Patrick, this is how he grew up, this is right. So for me, yeah, if you decide to keep my number or not, you've read my story and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I love that. I hope that someone is listening to this, and someone who needs to hear it is hearing it, because I think it is true. I think it is powerful. Like I said, I think it's brave. And I think anyone who is trying to write, anyone who's trying to share their story in any way, they need messages like that.
Yeah.
It's your truth.
True.
It's
true.
Write it.
It's your truth. Write it. Put it out there. In academia, we talk a lot about it too, and I've been mentored and been supported. Really, like when I'm writing about theories, I'm writing about early childhood development, etc., etc. That's it. I'm writing from my own perspective. If there's another scholar who differs in approach or differs in reads this and like, no, this is crazy. Well, that's an opportunity for that scholar to put up a paper, to put up a journal article, to put up a book that addresses and gives reasons why they think that what I've said or what I've written about doesn't work.
Excellent. Yes.
Right. That provides this opportunity for academic discourse, right? And be able to, always think critically and putting things out there that you, the reader, will be able to reflect and say, oh, I like this perspective, but Alison's perspective is much stronger than Patrick's. Yeah. But I'm grateful that I have two perspectives to think about and to think through, right? Yeah. And so, an encouragement, as you've said to the writers out there or those that are intending to write, hey, don't wait for another day. Start. Yeah. So I won't let you go, Alison, until you answer a traditional question that I always bring to my podcast here.
Okay.
So if you were to have dinner with three people, alive or late, who would those three be and why?
You know what's funny? I actually started a list of people.
Wow.
I started a list. And do I have that list with me? Okay. One of them.
Yeah.
Okay, one of them is a contemporary, and it is Trevor Noah.
Oh, yeah?
Trevor Noah, because I find Trevor Noah to be so curious in a way that I wish I were curious, Like I think I said to a friend once, oh, I wish like Trevor Noah were a friend of mine. No, I wish I had the level of curiosity that he has, like the questions that he asks, the conversation that he gets involved in. I just feel like he's not afraid to talk about anything, and that's essentially the type of person I would like to be. So I would say Trevor Noah, Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
Definitely Toni Morrison.
Sure.
I have a memory of her being on 60 Minutes when I was a kid. And they were talking to her about writing from an African American perspective.
Okay.
And, she's never shied away from that. She's just like, this is what I write. It doesn't limit me. And there's many interviews with her all over the internet where she's like, I do not feel limited by this. I feel empowered by this. This is what I do. And I love that about her. I feel like she really loved her people. So her. The third, who would the third be? Like I said, I had a list. I was
yeah.
The third person would be, I only have 3 choices, so I'm really trying to
to narrow down and get a particular one.
I don't know who would get the third spot yet. I don't know to give that one away.
Sure.
I'm gonna say that one. I'm going to say that one. Yeah.
Okay. So any of our listeners here who've got Trevor Noah's ear, please, shout out, make a plug. Alison would love to have visit. For lunch or for dinner, have a coffee chat, and just get into his psyche in terms of just how he's curious about stuff, eh? Alison, you are someone I look up to when it comes to, centering community and putting out, and seriously, you are consistent with the global narrative. IG, you're consistent even when we meet. You are always talking about, Black people and, the authorship and the ability to put out literature. And so thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for just putting out this calming energy, right, to the world and to just the work that we do as authors. It's tough, right? There's so many stories to share when it comes to sort of the struggles that authors face, and in particular Black authors face in terms of writing, putting their books out there, marketing them, and the like. But we're grateful. We're grateful for the work that you've done, and yes, wishing you a happy 2025 as you go through the rest of the year.
Thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait for part 2 of your memoir, and for you and I to have another conversation about how it was writing that and what you have up your sleeve. So it's been a pleasure. Enough respect to you. So
thank you, Alison. Thank you. Colleagues, friends, listeners, I was talking to Alison Isaac, a good friend of mine, writer and author, and again, a champion of all things literature. Thank you so much for joining us on The Voices Listed with Dr. PMak today. Thank you for listening to the Voices Listed podcast with Dr. PMak. I hope you enjoyed insights that came out of this conversation. Keep your notifications on. Our next episode will be dropping soon. Thank you and enjoy.